We've all been involved to some degree in the hype of AI. It's been hard to miss. However, as we move away from the initial excitement, it's time to turn the conversation towards some larger questions. From how businesses can leverage the power of AI to what its exponential growth means for us at the level of the individual, the community, and society as a whole, there are some big and important topics to consider. And to help us out in this discussion, we have Benjamin Rosman, a professor in the School of Computer Science and Applied Mathematics at the University of the Witwatersrand. Benjamin runs the Robotics, Autonomous Intelligence and Learning, or RAIL, laboratory, and is the director of the Mind Institute, a founder of Lelapa AI, and a fellow of the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research in their Learning in Machines and Brains program. His research interests focus primarily on reinforcement learning and decision-making in autonomous systems, specifically on how learning can be accelerated through abstracting and generalizing knowledge gained from solving related problems. He is also a founder and organizer of the Deep Learning Indaba Machine Learning Summer School, with a focus on strengthening African machine learning. Thanks for joining us. Okay, well, thanks for joining us today, Benji. I've given a formal introduction for everyone who is watching the podcast. Maybe you could tell me a little bit about yourself beyond the formal introduction, something that might surprise people about you.
Cool. Well, it's great to be here. What would surprise people about me? I was born at a very young age. I guess the AI thing was interesting. That used to be something surprising because people didn't know what that was all about. Now I've got to like dig deep and talk about like my passion for whiskey or Lego or something like that.
Yeah, that is something you were talking about just now, about how for a long time people didn't really care about AI or they weren't that interested, and suddenly everyone's interested in your field of expertise. How has that transition been?
I mean, it's kind of weird. So there's a couple stories from early in my career that I always think about, and one was kind of early on. Someone asked me what I work in, and I said artificial intelligence, and she went, whoa, so you believe in aliens? and then also like early on, I was giving a talk at one point, and I was talking about AI quite a bit. And then there was a gentleman at the back who was just like shaking his head and like he didn't know what's going on. Eventually he said, "I'm sorry, I can't handle this anymore. Isn't AI artificial insemination?" and we've gone from like that, where we were just these like kind of small group of people doing our weird kind of sci-fi thing in the corner, to suddenly like everyone's talking about this, and everywhere you go it's AI this and AI that, and I don't know, your new dishwasher is AI powered, and it's been kind of weird, particularly in the short space of time that it happened. Kind of looking back on it is not surprising because I was always betting big on this.
Yeah.
But seeing like your big bet pan out like that is a bit unnerving.
No, that makes sense. And I think, yeah, just the speed at which these changes have happened has been quite amazing.
Exactly. And like being aware of the speed of change of technology isn't something that you usually see it by looking back and
Yes.
reflecting on it, but to feel like you're living through it. I mean, maybe this is because I'm kind of working in the space, but just I think for everybody, like there's a new headline every 23 minutes that says like, oh, now there's the new tool version 28.7 that can now recognize all the things, and you're like, oh, the one I was using is completely out of date. But this is happening like on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And like kind of the discussions around productivity, everyone's found a new thing they're using and doing things a different way, and it's like super interesting that again it's happening at this pace. So like when kind of ChatGPT came out, like when it went, exploded into the public consciousness, I spent the next year or so mainly working with, well, not mainly, but doing a lot of work with kind of schools and universities on how to think about this. And then I've spent time with people in different industries, whether it's the advertising industry or like tech industry and so on. And what's interesting is always this perception that people have of like, okay, AI has happened, and now we need to get used to the new normal. And it's like, guys, that was the slowest it will ever be. It's just accelerating from here. Things are just going to get wilder and wilder. and you can't just like sit back because like just looking at it for 10 seconds shows you how fast things are moving.
Sure, yeah. And in terms of, I mean, on this podcast, we've spoken to a lot of accountants and to business owners about the ways that they're using AI. What would you say are some of the sort of best use cases for people, for accountants or for small businesses who are still kind of getting familiar with this tech?
So, so this is an interesting thing because, again, like what's cool about AI and I think different about it is just the breadth of impact that it has, right? Again, you can have conversations in any sector you want, and AI is creeping in there. And I think this is what makes it particularly interesting is just kind of this breadth of impact. But you combine that with the rate of change of things, and it's like difficult to pin down exactly where the value is. Now, what what I've seen in many sectors is different to other technologies coming in. The big impact has been how does it affect the individual? So many companies are like struggling with how do we fit AI into our like business practices or our business plans. Well, while they're having those discussions, everybody in the company has found their own use cases for this. And I think it's very interesting that it's almost personalized from the get-go, which again talks to the kind of the breadth of capabilities of a lot of these tools. I mean, I'm talking about AI as a single entity. So to me, what's important is kind of the mindset that you have when working with any of these tools. Because of how rapidly things change, because of the breadth of, going from generating music to making your email sound more sophisticated, right? That's a broad spectrum of things. So like the framing I like to take on is that if you're using one of these large language models, think of it as like you've just hired an intern of some sorts who's maybe fresh out of university, maybe has a couple PhDs even in like whatever topics are relevant to you, but is really naive about how the world works. So bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, and like no real world experience. So like you can give them tasks and they'll run off and do these things for you. But you should probably check what they're doing first. But it's quite broad what they're able to do for you.
Sure, I'm just picturing an intern who has a couple of PhDs, but I think that's a really good description because the amount of knowledge that AI like ChatGPT or all these other models has is quite incredible. You can ask it about so many things, and that's only going to keep going. But I think that's the important thing is always to check what output rather you are getting.
Yeah.
And on this note, I think we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsor. This podcast is brought to you by Sift Analytics. Sift Analytics is an interactive and collaborative financial reporting tool that helps you generate beautiful reports, forecasts, and consolidations in just a few clicks. Sift helps you increase revenue, reduce costs, save time, and look professional. It is also enhanced by AI-powered insights that help you go from data to decisions in no time. Want to find out more? Visit our website at siftanalytics.com to start a 14-day free trial today. In the past, a lot of the ways that people have been working with insights has been looking at what happened historically. I was wondering how AI can help us look towards the future a bit more in terms of predictive insights.
So I think, if we take kind of what AI is as kind of a broad umbrella term for all sorts of different technologies, and a lot of what's been exciting people over the last 10, 20 years has been machine learning as like the powerhouse. And that's been about like learning from data, right? And what does it mean to learn from data? It means you take a whole lot of data, you throw them into your machine learning model, and it gets better at doing something. And that something that it does is typically related to predictions, right? So this could be in terms of like predicting something time series wise, like financially, what are the stock prices going to look like tomorrow? Or what's the weather going to look like tomorrow? Or it could be something more kind of categorical, like what's in this image? Is this a dog or a cat or something like that? But it's always about making a prediction. Like that's really what we've been looking at for decades now is, particularly in a corporate space, we've spent some amount of time collecting data on our clients or our, product or whatever it is. And we want to draw insights. And insights from that are usually about saying something about what's going on, which is about kind of predicting the future. Now, the reason we want to predict the future, right, the reason we want to predict what is the weather tomorrow is to decide, do I need an umbrella when I go to work? Or is it a good day to go for a jog or something like that, right? So we make these predictions so that we can take actions as humans or as companies based on what we think is going to happen. And so like that's really the power that we've seen from machine learning for like a long time. And this goes like way back to doing like simple regression analysis, right? Is like trying to draw these insights out. I feel like where things are going now is through various different pathways. We're getting better at kind of automating the decision taking. And that's like, what we're seeing with a lot of now people talking about agentic AI quite a bit, which is, if your large language models or whatever they are able to act on the text that they're generating. But we see this in other places as well. This has been what many of us have worked on for a long time in, say, the space of robotics, where your robot has to take actions in the real world, right? And again, that's about like making predictions, like, if I want to pick up this glass, where does my hand need to be, and that sort of thing. So this is kind of the journey of what we do with data. And I think we're getting much better at kind of working with that. And this comes in many forms. Like also big pushes recently have been towards multimodal data, which means we can combine different modalities, whether it's text and audio and images, and get these kind of more holistic views of whatever it is we're trying to work with. And that's a lot of the successes that we've been seeing in recent years.
And then on the kind of, I wouldn't say pessimistic side, but there's obviously a lot of worry about AI and the idea that it's getting too clever, and that this is going to drastically change what jobs look like or what jobs exist. Maybe you could speak a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is something I spend a lot of time thinking and worrying about. What I've been talking about here has been, firstly, a big driver of the field for a number, like since its inception in the 50s, has been about kind of building more and more general purpose systems, right? And this is very much drawn from the questions of like, how does natural intelligence work? How do brains work? How are we able to do things as diverse as having a conversation and juggling and, writing an essay, right? How is it the same piece of kind of squishy jelly is able to do all these things? And that's driven like the field from a scientific perspective. And now we're starting to see that these capabilities are coming to fruition. So as your technology becomes more and more general purpose and better at what it's doing, that raises the question of like, how does this interact with people? So in the last couple of years, we've kind of found ourselves in a paradigm where particularly the big tech companies that develop these technologies are kind of pushing them out to the public all the time, right? So you've got billions of uses like every month of ChatGPT and friends. And what that means is everybody in like whether their work capacity or their personal capacity is using these tools. Now, a lot of that is great from like the improved productivity point of view, but they're getting better all the time. And so we can ask the question of like, what does this mean, like, somewhere downstream from that, right? So if we have particular tasks that in the past have meant, you had to employ someone in your kind of graphics division that's generating your I don't know, artworks for whatever, or someone else in a different division doing coding, or someone else in a different division doing legal work, right? Now, as kind of the bar on what these tools can do raises, that means there's certain things that people aren't doing in each of those spaces. So the way this is often portrayed is this is a great thing, right? I don't need to waste time on, some of the simpler tasks,
yeah,
right? But often we didn't waste time on the simpler tasks. We had interns doing that. So maybe we don't need those interns anymore, which isn't great if they've got to somehow progress in their careers themselves. Or, okay, so the simple tasks are being handled, but actually some of the not so simple tasks are being handled as well. And so a lot of that kind of cuts in on what you're doing in your professional life. I think the challenge here is that we have no reason to think that there's anything kind of cognitively that we do as humans that we couldn't get these tools to do, right? And again, we've seen no evidence that there's like some tasks that are magically untouchable by machines. In fact, on the contrary, we keep getting surprised by what these things can do. You always hear these, well, a few years ago, you'd always hear these things of, oh, but a machine will never be creative. And then turns out like one of the first things that kind of was automated was like art. I mean, not to say that that's exactly comparable, but there's certainly a lot of creativity happening there. And people would say the same things about coding, and that's happening. That people would say the same things about empathy, and turns out a lot of these models show surprising amounts of empathy. And the challenge to me is that this is kind of an attack from every direction on what we do as humans in our cognitive work. Now, humans kind of, our work exists in two main spheres, and that's kind of physical and cognitive. And the kind of previous industrial revolutions and things challenged a lot of what we did in our physical work. But, you know, where there was automation was on particular tasks, and humans could move to other skill sets or move into the cognitive realm. But now, you know, it's not clear what, you know, if your job as an accountant or as a lawyer or as a coder was automated away, it's not clear what you would shift to. And to me, this is like a bit of a almost existential question for our world of work as we know it. Like, what should we be doing? How should we be thinking about the future of work? And I think that there's a lot of challenges we've, as a society, got to unravel here. Along a lot of dimensions of like, so if there's, you know, the number of available jobs in not just one sector, but many sectors starts drying up at the same time, what do we do about it? And I think there's positive framings of these things that, you know, maybe we could think about this as ways of almost alleviating us from some of the work we're doing, but that requires some changes to our economic systems as well.
Yeah, I think it's some very big changes to consider. Hopefully still a bit further down the line. I know you share that AI 27 article with me.
2027, yeah.
2027, sorry, yes. But 2027, not very far away, which makes it feel a little bit scary for those of us that quite enjoy some sense of like stability in the work that we do, even if we're kind of used to this constant change with technology. 2027 sounds very close for such a drastic change. It made me think of something else that a previous podcast guest said. He was watching a docu-series about the making of Star Wars and how it all started off with these guys doing special effects where they would make little like stop motion figures, and they had puppets, and they had models of spaceships that they built, and it was this painstaking sort of physical craft to make these special effects. And then obviously over time, as the technology progressed and we got computer graphics, everything changed. And it was, do these people now decide to embrace computer graphics? Do they still stick to stop motion? And there were sort of two camps, you know, the people that wanted to stay making models, the people that were saying, you know what, I can still be creative using a computer. And so this podcast guest we had on said that is how accountants should think, right? They should think, maybe I should take on this technology, see where I can go with this. This is the future. But it's a little bit tricky if it sounds like that technology could potentially change everything about your life and the way that you work.
It's true. I mean, I don't know what the future will look like, and I don't know what the timelines are. I'm pretty sure that the world 5 years from now is going to look pretty different in some ways. Like in other ways, we're still not going to have our flying cars and stuff. But I think particularly our relationship to work is going to be really challenged in the next few years. And I think this is going to play out in a lot of interesting ways. But, you know, by the same token, there's so many opportunities. Like there's never been a better time to, explore creating new things. There's so many stories of, a single person or a couple of people starting a crazy company because now they can get some of the legal help they want and the accounting help they want and the coding help they want. And, you can kind of build your whole army of employees. There's certainly limitations. These are going to change all the time, and it's in the interest of big tech to be addressing these all the time. But there's never been a better time to venture into new opportunities than now, because for free or for like minimal subscription rates, you can get like basically the combined wisdom with some hallucinations thrown in of like the history of humanity, in your like over enthusiastic interns, as many of them as you want. They can help you out on whatever crazy vision you have.
Yeah, so not all doom and gloom for sure. And I think it's again that thing, not trusting everything that, say, ChatGPT or Gemini, or I was going to say whoever you're speaking to, whatever you're speaking to. I think perhaps also not anthropomorphizing the technology, although I'm sure that that will increasingly become part of how we interact with AIs. I suppose on the note of like checking if there are any hallucinations, checking if there's anything that's kind of been snuck in there that's not accurate. How would you approach sort of data security or safety with AI?
I mean, there's a lot there as well. I just want to say on the anthropomorphizing, I do find it quite useful actually. I was very against it, and then I realized a lot of people, when you speak to them about AI, in their head they're thinking like, what we modern AI is like a database, and when you talk to ChatGPT, it's searching the database or doing a Google search. And I think it's actually more useful to think of it as you're interacting with an intelligent creature, maybe not a human, maybe like an alien of some sorts, but I think these different framings are useful for different things. The safety question is a difficult one as well, and there's a lot of facets to this that range from like, data, the kind of data privacy type questions of, the most standard things are like, be careful what data you throw into the model. It could, use this and train on this. And there've been so many cases of company secrets being leaked into, whatever big tech company they were throwing the data into. A lot of this is kind of like good hygiene and practices, which, need to be developed over time. But there's many other questions. A lot of the kind of worry in the space is around these technologies being better and better at doing things like hacking, or being able to infer from limited data other variables. So, where in the past we might have said, okay, there's certain data that you want to keep anonymized, for example. And there was always like cases where people could de-anonymize things. If you knew enough features about someone, you could figure out who it was. And these kinds of tools make that sort of task easier, and that is more accessible to potentially, a variety of bad actors and so on. These are issues as well, which, I think one of the challenges that every company is going to be facing now going forward is that they're going to have to take their like security, their digital cybersecurity way more seriously than they have in the past. Because in the past, if someone wanted to hack you, if they wanted to access your data, I mean, typically the kind of best way to do this would be to find someone who's forgotten to log out, or and get access to the system, or guess that their password was password. But if you needed to do something more sophisticated, that required like quite a sophisticated like skill set. But now these tools are more and more able to like augment people in that way as well. So it's not just augmenting them in good ways, but bad ways as well. There's a lot of potential for bad actors to exploit these things. But what that means is that I think we'll find companies spending a larger and larger percentage of their budget invested into cybersecurity, and potentially probably using AI to help with that as well.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. So we do like sort of cybersecurity training at SIFT, where we learn about like phishing emails, and don't click the link that says it's from your manager sharing the budget with you. And we often get tested on that with these like fake phishing emails. So I think it will probably have to become something that's incorporated into the security training for your company. Like, this is how I mean, I don't know how you would tell. We would have to think about how you would be able to tell if an AI, yeah, was influenced by bad actors, but that would have to be incorporated into more of that kind of security training.
I mean, in other ways, there's other ways that this is getting harder as well because, you're able to now clone people from like images or video or audio. And there've been a few high-profile cases of this where someone has received a call from like a chief financial officer or a CEO or something and told to, in a call, to move money to a certain account, which like that whole thing was just synthesized from some images and audio. There've been something I think is particularly terrifying a couple cases of people being like a woman being getting a call and it's someone saying, we've kidnapped your daughter, and if you don't send $10,000 to this account in the next 10 minutes, then we'll kill her or something. And you know, then they'll have her on the phone, like crying and screaming and saying she's been captured. But like that was actually just cloning her voice from like a spam call that recorded enough data on her voice to replicate it. I think we're going to get more and more weird cases like this, and I'm not quite sure what the solution to this will look like. It may involve, running a defensive AI on your side that's going to try and like give you extra information of this seems to not be legit for the following reasons. But there's a bit of an arms race that's starting to develop there. And I think people need to be more aware that at least this is a problem earlier rather than later, so they're not caught unawares.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's something that people need to be paying a lot of attention to now to figure out how we can combat that in the future. It's quite scary.
There's a lot we've got to think about now that we didn't have to before.
Definitely. And in terms of, I guess, the future of computer science for students who are studying machine learning or AI or just coding in general, how do you see that developing?
So, like the whole education space, I don't know what's going to happen to. I mean, there's certainly the hot space to be in right now. Everybody wants these skills. I think around things like coding, it's unclear that coders are going to be like so in demand for like much longer, right? So like someone who's just like very good at one programming language, I think that's like as these tools get better and better at coding, I think we're going to find that the emphasis is going to change slightly. And so, for example, what we do at Wits is we teach more how to think about programming as a form of problem solving, right? So in a way, we're kind of agnostic to the language you use and the tools you use. What you want to do is say, like, I've got a problem, I want to be able to think through it in a logical way. Now, that's a skill that I think is just generally super useful. So when we look at like the kind of what AIs are able to do on the programming front, they're getting better and better at this. But they're typically, at least for now, things will change. They're able to write the code that might have taken a human 45 minutes or an hour or two, that kind of thing. But to deal with a really big project, you need to like piece lots of these things together. So you almost need the manager of a whole lot of coders, and to do that, you need to understand what's going on there. And so I think that for a while is still going to be important. At the same time, there's so much work to be done in the space of AI, in building better AI, particularly in terms of like energy efficiency, data efficiency, but also safer AI that's better aligned to the values of society and so on. And I think there's just a huge need for people to be active in that space. And when I say people, like I'm not even just limiting this to computer scientists. We need more people that are thinking about ethics and philosophy and psychology and governance and all these different areas to be engaging in this space collaboratively. I think that's like this kind of cross-field way of thinking is going to become more and more important as we're in a space where we're getting more and more competent tools that have some sort of understanding of things that go on. We need to have more awareness as a society of what we want to see, how we want to steer like our future.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think there are a lot of those more sort of humanities side ways of thinking that will be very helpful, as you said, in terms of the ethics or like the potential values that AI might have, how we interact. And then I think also on the point of sustainability, how having these programs is not the right word, but how this impacts the environment, in terms of cutting down lots of trees, how much water it takes to actually keep all of this going.
Yeah, exactly. And the carbon emissions and all this kind of thing. So, you know, it's funny that a lot of people say that AI is the solution to climate change. And I've got a lot of sympathy for this kind of view because I think climate change is a very hard problem, and we typically solve hard problems by throwing more intelligence at them. So it's a generally good philosophy, but the way it's set up at the moment is that to run these tools that are supposed to help us solve the problem, we're making the problem worse. So it's a kind of weird situation. Now we find all the big tech companies having discussions about building nuclear reactors to be able to like power their compute centers and that sort of thing. So it's a bit of a weird space to be in. I think more work needs to be done on building tools that are more efficient. It's interesting because we know that, in terms of things that are capable of coding, we've got these really energy, like expensive, like large language models, and we've got humans, and we tend to just feed us some burgers or pizza and, we get the job done. There's a big differential in the energy requirements there. From a scientific perspective, I think that's interesting because that says there's multiple paths to the same outcome. And can we scientifically build things that are maybe more inspired by natural intelligence that help us solve some of these problems in a more efficient way? And I think that's going to be exciting to see what happens in that space over the next few years. And to an extent, I think something's going to have to happen there because the demands on these tools is just growing all the time. And I think there's only so much that we can, only so many logs we can throw into the fire to keep it going.
Yeah, we have finite natural resources that we
Exactly.
obviously want to take care of.
Yeah, now we're fighting with AI. We don't realize this yet, but we're fighting with AIs for our natural resources. Well, not really AIs, like the companies that run the AIs,
Yes.
but
So I think also it'll be interesting to see politically how that plays out and where there are more regulations in different countries. I know like in the EU, there are a lot more regulations around AI than in other parts of the world. And maybe that'll be something that increases as well.
Yeah, I think so. And it's also been interesting to see how kind of politicians around the world are slowly waking up to what this means, which is it's kind of interesting process to watch because, someone with a political background is, thinks about tech in a certain way, which is maybe more about like the impact on the economy. But, this raises a whole lot of different issues. And to see over the last, even 3 years, how the kind of talking points of politicians globally, and even within Africa. I was recently at the AI summit in Rwanda, and interestingly, there were similar talking points to what I saw at the AI summit in Paris. That politicians globally, maybe not all of them, but like there's a good chunk kind of everywhere that are realizing some of the implications. And I think this is going to have huge impacts on everything from the economy to even political alliances to what countries you're trying to curry favor with to get good supplies of chips or, better access to data centers and these kinds of things. And I suspect, again, over the next few years, we're going to see that this becomes a greater and greater force in kind of geopolitics as well.
Absolutely. I feel like we've covered kind of everything in this podcast, from existential threats, what's happening to the future of work, politics, the environment. Going to end off with a few rapid fire questions that we always have on the podcast.
Cool.
So whatever comes to mind first. What's a great book that you would recommend?
Great book that I'd recommend. I mean, I think kind of in this kind of space, I find the zooming out from the 30,000 feet views pretty interesting, and I've always enjoyed kind of Yuval Noah Harari's takes on some of these things. But on the other side, there's a lot to stress about and worry about in the world, and it's always good to dip into some Terry Pratchett.
That's great. And a software recommendation, a tool that you are loving using at the moment?
A tool that I'm loving using. I always joke that like in my job as a researcher, I program in grad students. Um, that I get to think about the big picture and then they have to execute things, and then I spend my time in front of Zoom calls. But I must say, as kind of cliched as it is now, I try and challenge myself more and more to use AI on things that would otherwise have taken up time and not been particularly stimulating to me. And there I typically use ChatGPT for its general purposeness. But whenever I've got a task, I always ask myself, is there a way that I could have maybe automated this? And then I might actually end up spending more time figuring that out, but at least it's more fun.
You might spend more time setting it up, but then maybe if you repeat it in the future,
Yeah, exactly.
it'll be quicker. That's the hope. If there was just one thing that whoever's listening or watching this podcast took away from today's discussion, what would you want it to be?
I would say like there's kind of a couple of values that are more important now than they've ever been. And the first is curiosity. And we're in this time when things are changing crazily fast. And it's, even for someone who's working in the field, it's fast, right? I think the numbers thrown around are something like there's 500 academic papers in AI written a day at this point.
Wow.
So no one can keep up with that, but you've got to keep kind of curious about what's happening and where things are going, and just dipping your toe in here and there to get a sampling of what's happening. And I think this is important because, you're not looking for the eureka moments, but you never know when you're going to see something that might have a big impact on your life. And the kind of other value that I think is really important is to ask yourself about your own values. And, how do you think of yourself as a person? And I think as we're in a time when we're going to see, again, more and more technology arriving everywhere, more active in the work we do, I think a lot of people define themselves by what they do for a living.
Yes.
And I think that it's important to be aware of the broader question of like, who are you? Who do you want to be as a person? That's not tied to your work, because we're not clear what's going to happen in that space. What are the values that are really important to you? And questioning these things, I think, it really gets to the core of who we are as people and of humanity. And I think now is the right time to spend more time thinking like the philosophers of old.
Absolutely. So even as we're looking towards the future and thinking, what's going to happen in the next few years, it's probably a useful time to look back into the past and what people have been thinking about and worrying about and focusing their attention on for thousands of years.
Exactly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Benji, for taking the time to be on the podcast. Thank you to everyone who's been listening. And I think it's a good time for us all to think about our values, our place in the world, and what really matters to us.
Yeah, thanks so much, and thanks for listening and watching.
Thanks for tuning in to the Beyond Insights podcast.
Please like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to right now.
And please share with any of your colleagues or friends or family members that you think might benefit from listening to this podcast.
That's all from us. Until next time, see you then.